Hello, Filiqui here, and today I'll be looking at Fable Anniversary. This game was not a remaster of the original Fable, as I first thought when I heard of it, but the Lost Chapters. The Lost Chapters was really just more Fable, which I thought was great, so no loss in my book. However, I want to get this out of the way early. Just load the voice acting of Jack of Blades in the Lost Chapters and consequently the Anniversary Edition. The new, deeper, harsher voice was really just a big swing and a miss for me.
I have returned. After an eternity away from you all, Jack of Blades is back.
Nevertheless, I love the original Fable. In fact, I rank it as one of my all-time favorite games, easily making my top 10 for various reasons. So if this comes off as what makes this game great kind of video, then yeah, I can see that. So let's dive into the visuals. The best way to describe the art direction in this game is simply charming. Everything comes off as small scale, but in a fitting and enduringly quaint manner. The art direction is both cartoony, yet at the same time carries a believable semblance to reality. I like that the weapons really stand out, and while there aren't many, there is enough to keep things interesting as you progress. Admittedly, it's the legendary weapons that really make the weapons interesting, as the standard weapons purchased in shops and blacksmiths are, well, lackluster, almost as if designed by purpose to be lackluster and make you want to get those legendary weapons. Now, I'm not talking about their damage or what they do. I'm just talking about the way they look, obviously, because there's very little difference between the iron katana and the obsidian katana. I mean, unless you're really focusing in on them, they kind of look like the same katana to me. The augmentation system helps give them a little visual flair in terms of the standard weapons, but still, it's the legendaries that really keep things interesting in terms of what kind of weapons you. In terms of how the weapons look, spells, physical attacks, and just about everything else but the walking animation, which really looks rigid, are enjoyable to repeatedly watch executed. The enemies are varied enough that when you enter a new location, you're likely to encounter a different type, and the bosses are usually designed intimidatingly enough to grab your attention. The rest of the enemies border on this cartoonish yet present enough odious appearance that makes them both threatening yet, I suppose the word is whimsical. The rest of the characters in the game carry that same overall charming feel to them, except for Briar Rose, whose design and character was just not my cup of coffee. The artificial and natural worked well with each other in a sort of spectrum, as if things go from the presence of civilization to the untamed wild of the natural. In essence, they really don't stand in contrast with each other, they more or less blend with one another. Ultimately, the Anniversary Edition looked to me just like the original. Of course, the graphics have been updated, but the atmosphere, ambient, and direction are all pretty much exactly what I remembered loving about the original. If I had to sum it all up, it would really break down to this fantastical look that gives an impression of realism. It's sort of like you're in a fantasy, but it's a fantasy that adheres to the real, if that makes any sense. The only thing that bugged me visually was the aging and physical progression of the player. On the one hand, I love the impact that the choices made in the game had on the character's appearance. On the other hand, I wasn't too fond of the odd aging system that made my character look like an old hermit at such an astonishing rate that I thought he would die of old age long before I even reached the end. Admittedly, there are ways to prevent, even reduce, the aging appearance by doing the whole sacrificing or donation thing at the Temple of Scorn or the Temple of it's the Chapel of Scorn or the Temple of Avil, but still, I felt the aging was rather drastic for the level of skill progression that goes along with it. Now, when it comes to the audio, the first thing that comes to mind is how much I enjoyed the music. There was little more rewarding in the game than opening a demon door to not only get the item or weapon inside, but to also hear the tune, tune you get to listen to when entering one of them. The voice acting is endearing, and the generic townfolk can come off as sounding appropriately charming and somewhat naggy at times. But a highlight of the game has to be the chicken noises. I mean, it really sounds like you just have chickens running around, and that would be the noise that chickens make when and if you kick one. On that note, the game does have this weird fascination with chickens that makes me feel like I'm missing some sort of symbolic meaning behind them, but I'm not going to spend too much time or much of any time on the symbology of chickens in the Fable universe. So, anyway, the noises that the monsters make border from impishly devious to downright intimidating. My favorite kills are the fairies. They border on being downright annoying, and it's not just because they fly around you throwing their little spells at you, but it's just that weird noise that they make as they're flying around you that really just makes you want to hurl a fireball or fire an arrow right into their faces. The protagonist of the game is for the most part silent, of course, but when using the expressions, you can hear his voice. A voice that oddly never changes, even though he clearly goes through some ridiculously rapid aging if you're cashing in those skill points. Well, I suppose he does make much younger sounding sounds as a child, but that doesn't really count for me. The farts sound like farts, but the flirting sound is creepy enough to make me feel like my character would be better suited wearing a deep V with a hairy chest sporting a golden medallion. The follow and wait sounds or expressions are also pretty monotone, almost as if it was a robot saying it. Just goes, wait, follow. Sounded weird to me. Anyway, anyways, the anyway, the sounds made by each spell complement each other well. The inflame spell sounds just like you would imagine a summoned ring of fire would sound. Assassin's Rush sounds well fast, and my personal favorite slow time sounds like I would imagine entering slow motion would sound like. Ultimately, the sounds lend themselves excellently to the visuals. The outcome is a pleasantly fairy tale like world that is simply a joy to hear and see. When it comes to the gameplay, I enjoyed the simplicity of the systems and mechanics within the game. I brought my car in and they told me what was wrong with it in no uncertain terms. Besides having great mechanics, you guys see what I did there? Terrible. The combat can be varied. Using a mix of melee, magical, and range attacks is possible, but I mostly stuck with a mix of melee and magical spells, with the magical spells primarily meant to enhance my melee prowess. To be quite honest, everything seems sort of bare bones. Nothing really carried much depth to it, but I didn't notice this when I played the original Fable. It became more apparent playing the Anniversary Edition. Obviously, this is because I've played a number of different RPGs that are more in depth with their combat, crafting systems, or just the general mechanics of their games, but I still don't think of the lack of depth in this game as a negative. This is primarily because I enjoyed the ability to just start up the game and pick up where I left off. For example, some games require you to really think about what you're doing with your skill points or how to effectively use your spells in battle. But in this game, it's really just a matter of having enough potions and you'll be fine. And if you get the right combinations of spells, even the potions won't become an issue. My favorite system my favorite system in this game is tied to the combat. It's basically how you gain experience based on which attacks you use. This is just a personal preference of mine, and I enjoy it far more than the systems that simply provide non attached experience points that let you assign them to whatever skill you want to assign them to. To me, that always felt like the game was disregarding how you're playing it up to that point and telling you, just go ahead and do whatever you feel is right. One of the best things about this game is how the world reacts to your presence. Admittedly, the reactions can come off as rather shallow, but still they do enough to make the player feel like the NPCs are well aware of the players? Let's go with the player's presence. This only becomes more apparent with higher renown and stronger alignment to either good or evil, but it's even there from the start. I loved hearing the villagers comment whenever I approached during the early portion of the game where I got to play as a child. It's actually one of my hangups with the game. I wish the childhood stage would have lasted a little bit longer or been somewhat more meaningful, but that's something else. The reactionary world is even apparent in combat. For example, I loved how some of the hobs cowered in battle as you tore through their compatriots and they began to pray to either, I imagine, Gork or Mork because they share the same god as the orcs from Warhammer. I'm likely very wrong on that, but my point is, it still gave the world a sense of personality and believability that made the gameplay thoroughly engaging. The gameplay made the game thoroughly engaging. The rest of the systems, like the relationship system, the augmentation system, the crime system, and even the system of the down, which might or might not be in the game, are serviceable yet enjoyable. Again, not much depth to them, but still fun to utilize. The morality system is, well, interesting. I mean, what constitutes morally good and evil actions makes sense and is fairly consistent within the world, but I didn't really think it was necessary to attach any sort of alignment points to the killing of individual monsters and enemies. This isn't some philosophical position I'm taking. I mean, I just didn't think I was being benign when I happened to kill a hob, as I was aiming for a merchant that the hob just happened to be nearby. I suppose in the end, when I finally killed the merchant, it kind of canceled each other out and it was a neutral act, but I still don't think that was a neutral act. Nevertheless, it's still plenty enjoyable to watch your character be marked by evil or good as you move through the game. There are still some major choices that you can make throughout the game that give your character plenty of evil or good alignment, but those small points from the killing of inconsequential enemies just didn't feel appropriate, particularly as I was playing an unmistakably evil character. In terms of immersion, it simply breaks down to every time I play the game, I feel like I'm a part of the world. Everything from the music, environment, combat, and the choices made really make me feel like I'm a component of an evolving world. Admittedly, the evolution is a little more than a simple illusion, but still, it works well enough for me to fall for the illusion. Special requests from demon doors, reactionary NPCs, and just kicking chickens. The world just seems lively and effectively engaging. Admittedly, if you look too deeply into any of the systems or mechanics, it begins to break down the illusion rather quickly. But this isn't the kind of game you need to or would even want to look beyond the surface level to enjoy. When it comes to longevity, before the Anniversary Edition was released, I would find myself returning to play the Lost Chapters edition of the game, usually after having played one of the not so satisfying sequels. The game has two inherently built in playthroughs, playing as either an evil or good aligned character. Now, there is a measure of replayability if you want to see how the combat styles unfold from the very beginning. However, I found the game's greatest asset when it comes to longevity is simply the enduring nature of the world and the character you create. Now, no matter how much I love the world, this really isn't one of those games you can play for hundreds of hours, but in the end, this is a game that I enjoy returning to every so often, even if it's just for fond memories. So ultimately, the Anniversary Edition was a satisfyingly nostalgic experience for me. So I'll take this and say that players who love the original or Lost Edition version of the game will obviously, if not already doing so, return to the game and enjoy it. Players that didn't fall for that original charm, I doubt will fall for it now with this edition. And brand new players might not be so easily sold on the game's charm, especially after already having played various other RPGs, or if they've already played various other RPGs that have somewhat built and improved on Fable presented, what the Fable series presented in this game. So my final rating on this game is a diamond star out of a bronze avocado. Not sure what that amounts to, but comparatively, I wouldn't like my avocados bronze. Conversely, a diamond star does sound prestigious. So that's the metric I compose now. See where that goes. That wraps things up for me. Thanks for watching. Unless you had the video on mute the whole time, in which case, thanks for listening. Huh, other way around. Thanks for listening. Unless you had the video on mute the whole time. Thanks for watching.